Live streaming is on.
Right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Undercurrent News's latest webinar. I'm Neil Ramsden, Deputy Editor of Undercurrent News. Today, I'm going to be moderating a panel discussion, which is going to cover some of the trends and the outlook in some of the most important markets for farmed shrimp globally. Before we get fully started, I'd like to thank our sponsor today, who is Sunnyvale Seafood. With their support, we're able to bring these webinars to you for free. We also welcome Sunnyvale's CEO, Jeff Sedacca, as one of our panelists today. As ever with our webinars, our sponsors have no more input as to the content than any other panelist. So our last webinar on the shrimp market, we held in February of this year, and it focused more on the upstream side of the supply chain, how the production outlook and how prices were likely to develop under the new normal of the coronavirus pandemic. This time we want to focus more on the downstream side of things and hear about how important markets like the US, Europe, and China have developed this year and how they look set to develop going into the summer and beyond. So if I could briefly invite our panelists to introduce themselves and let us know where they're joining us from. If you could introduce yourself, Sophia.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sophia. I'm the editor-in-chief of Seafood Tip. We are currently based in Netherlands, and we are basically a market intelligence company, and we produce reports also to increase the sustainability and the transparency within the sector.
Great. And Jim?
Yeah, I'm Jim Gulkin. I'm coming to you from Bangkok. I'm the Group Managing Director of Siam Canadian. We are a trading company and service provider, having been in the seafood industry for the past 35 years.
Great. And Gabriel?
Yep, my name is Gabriel. I've been in the seafood industry since 2004. I am based in Ecuador. I have a company where we study the statistics and the export data for Ecuador's production, and where it's shipped, the shifts from 1 month to another in our exports, country-wise or product type. So I've been doing this for a while, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you. And finally, Jeff.
Yes, hi, I'm Jeff.
Have we immediately lost Jeff? Okay, well, Jeff, as mentioned, is CEO of Sunnyvale Seafoods, who is a seafood importer based in Florida, US. Hi, Jeff, is that you back?
Yeah, we're based in Union City, but I live in Florida, so we have a satellite office here.
Great. Sorry to take your spot there, Jeff. All right. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Louis, who's going to take us through a presentation on imports, exports, and some of the prices using the information that can be found at Undercurrent's data pages. And then after that, Sophia will give us a presentation as well, looking at the European markets. And then after those two, we'll go into a panel discussion with hopefully plenty of time left for audience questions. For those members of the audience watching on Navus, you'll see a chat box. You can enter your questions there anytime, and they will filter through to me to moderate. Okay, so if I can hand over to Louis.
Thank you, Neil. So as Neil mentioned, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of shrimp trade data and looking at the kind of trends and the major importing markets and also exporters. So yeah, I'll first show you what's likely to happen what's some of the key trends over the past few years. And then I'll show you what's likely to happen in major importing markets from this summer onwards, based on monthly import trends. So first of all, let's look at the global imports over the past decade or so. So as we can see from trade data, global imports have risen significantly over the past 10 years or so, up an estimated 1.1 million metric tons since 2012, or 50%, to 3.15 million metric tons in 2019. Last year, there was a contraction of about 3% due to the pandemic, the first contraction since the 2008 and 2009 financial crisis. But it was a slight contraction, much less than what perhaps people were anticipating at the start of the pandemic. So what has driven this really huge increase in imports? Well, we think largely China. We estimate it accounted for 70 to 75% of the global shrimp import growth over the period. So its imports soared from 48,000 tons in 2012 to an estimated 800,000 tons last year in 2019. Last year there was quite a big drop, but we'll get into that later. There was also, over the past 10 years, increases in imports in the US and EU, and overall those major markets, US, EU, China and Japan, accounted for about 77% of global shrimp imports by volume, and by value about 80%. So really we are looking at these major markets in terms of what's going to be happening, what's going to be driving imports and trends over the next year, summer and autumn. So if we look at, again, China in a bit more detail, we see this 15-fold increase in imports, followed mainly outbreaks of disease in China, which hit its own sizable domestic production. Also, the increase was down to China's growing middle classes. Again, mentioned as before, this big contraction last year, though, in imports due to COVID, largely because of consumer worries about detections of the coronavirus on shrimp packages. This was actually the biggest contraction in imports by a major importer. And actually, had that not happened, we think possibly global imports would have stayed flat or even increased last year. So it really was a particular situation in China. We see over the past 10 years, imports in the US have risen pretty nicely, up 40% since 2012. And last year, importing almost, well, 750 million metric tons of shrimp, representing compound annual growth rate of about 4.3%. And then in Europe, well, growth hasn't been as nice. It's been about 1.1% each year between 2012 and 19. And last year they actually contracted 3%. We then look onto Japan quickly. We see that imports have actually contracted quite significantly, and then other countries, they've actually risen though, so offsetting that decrease in Japan. So if we have a quick look at the monthly import trends, we see what we can expect this summer is imports across all major importing markets to increase, typically due to the seasonal increase in harvesting and also as importers prepare for Thanksgiving and Christmas. So in a normal year, monthly imports in the US rise and peak in around October, November. It's the same seen here in Europe, tending to peak towards the latter stage of the year. And then also in China, this happens, but tends to happen a bit later in November, December, as importers stock up for Chinese New Year, typically in late January or early February. Again, we see in Japan this monthly increase in imports towards the end of the year. So let's have a quick look at the imports according to suppliers. We see on this left-hand side of this table the annual imports last year, and then on the right-hand side of the table, imports in the most recent few months according to latest available trade data. Last year, US imports increased by 7% and have increased 10% so far this year. Major increase in supply of Ecuadorian imports. It's up 66% last year to 126,000 tons. It's quite extraordinary. And then also still rising this year, up 37%. China, though, they're really struggling in the US market due to tariffs, down 46%. It'd be interesting to know what's going on with the breaded shrimp market there now, because China was a big supplier of breaded shrimp into that market. Who's taking over that? Perhaps one for the panel to discuss. And China imports down 16% last year due to the above mentioned COVID scares. Big declines in imports from India, Argentina, Thailand. But actually, imports from Ecuador are only down 1% overall. Although now currently down 6% in the past few months. As you can see here, pointing those out. Japan, again, last year, imports contracted 5%. But the interesting thing about Japan is obviously the really high value of imports per kilogram. It's $9.84 per kilo. Quickly skim through the exports. As we can see, Indian exports contracted 14% last year to around 575,000 tons. And then if we look at exports, in the most recent few months, still down about 5%. Contrast is with Ecuador. It grew its exports last year despite the pandemic and despite all the issues in Ecuador at the early stage of the pandemic, and up 7%. And then, as we see, most recent 4 months of this year, it's still up 10% to 242,000 tons. Really extraordinary growth. So that's a pretty whistle-stop tour of global trade. We want to get on straight to the panel discussion, really, so don't want to keep you. But some talking points, really, some here was, how big will the vaccine boost be to global trade? Is Seaspiracy impacting consumption? And, well, of course, the pandemic is far from over, and where will the biggest problems be for the industry looking ahead? All this trade data is available and on our website, and actually you can find much more besides that. We have data for other species as well, whitefish, pollock, you name it. We've probably got it on there. So yeah, I will now pass you back over to Neil.
Thank you very much. And I will hand over to Sophia to talk about the European market. Sophia, if you want to share your screen and take over.
Yeah. Share. I think it's okay. And then present. Yeah. Thank you, Lois, for that presentation, and thank you all again for inviting me to this to present our findings as well as our data from Seafood Tip. Again, I'm Sophia, the editor-in-chief of Seafood Tip, and today I will be presenting data on the European shrimp market, and we'll look into what has happened in the previous year as well as the data available in the previous month, and also take a look a bit into the future and see where the challenges and opportunities can be as well. For the European shrimp market, it's really important to remember that it is Europe is a diverse market, and that Europe is usually divided in the seafood market between Northwestern Europe, which is more in demanding for the retail side, more processed shrimp, and then as opposed to the Southern Europe, which is also a processing region, and second, that it demands more hoso shrimp, and it demands more those whole red shrimp for restaurants as well in the European shrimp market. So those two regions we're going to look in more closely. And I start with Southern Europe. In this particular slide, you will see that we've covered mostly specific countries, mostly importing countries from Southern Europe. And we see here that actually there was a lower average import price since mid 2020. You see here that by the end of the year, it slightly recovered, but at the beginning of the year, that it's still below the average levels in the previous years. What is important probably to note is that the lower average import price is mainly driven by Ecuador because of the low prices, import prices coming from Ecuador, and therefore the whole import prices also dropped. Um, and as you can see here below this graph is the main supplying countries to Southern Europe. And you can see here that actually Ecuador's share actually grew as they export lower priced shrimp to Northwestern Europe, and as they focus more actually to more processed shrimp. So that's really important to note. And in Southern Europe, as I've mentioned, it is a big process. It has a huge processing sector, particularly in Spain, also in Italy, and some in France as well. And that currently for the automatic tariff quota, that there is still 32,000 tons still open out of the 48,000 tons for 2021. So that's quite a lot of tonnage and a lot of material still to be imported under the 0% tariff quota. And of course, Ecuador is not usually has already the fair trade agreement for between Europe, so they are already exporting 0%. Okay, and now we look into the Northwestern Europe. So here we looked into main importing countries, also trading nations such as Germany, Netherlands, and Belgium. And what is important to note is that the import prices actually only mildly declined, as you can see here. It's not as steep as the one in Southwestern Europe. And also at the same time, the share of Ecuador also increased, as you can see here in the graph below. Vietnam still remained to be also an important supplier to the Northwestern Europe. All right. Okay. And also related to the Northwestern Europe, of course, is the demand for the sustainable products. And of course, that is well represented with the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or AIC certificate. And that demand for certified product actually kept growing for both species, the Vanamai and the black tiger shrimp. So that's very interesting because for Vanamai, it's actually logical to see certified shrimp products actually increase because they are mostly serving to the retail sector. Well, what is curious or interesting is actually also the black tiger shrimp increasing, as you can see here in the magnified version between the months leading up to November 2020. And that means that if needed, the black tiger shrimp, which is usually consumed in hotels and restaurants and in these areas, that they're actually maybe then served also in the retail sector, because we also know that most restaurants are also closed. So probably they are used for takeaways in the restaurants, or probably they are also getting demanded from the retail sector. So that's quite interesting to see that both of the species, both serve in the retail and the food service sector, are actually increasing. All right. And now, because I've earlier mentioned that the European data is, of course, delayed, we wanted to look also to the suppliers, main suppliers to the European market, because these play a very crucial role in understanding the market dynamics in the Europe. So you can see here that Ecuador, actually, the prices there are increasing since January, and that's driven by the demand, the increasing recovery from China, as Lois also mentioned earlier, and that it has also increasing market share in both the US and the EU, and that's mostly what's driving the prices up. So as you can see here, you can also see these prices in our portal at Seafood Tip. For India, as has been mentioned earlier, there is a bit of a problem with the COVID-19 resurgence, and it's definitely affecting the shipments to Europe. And as you know, the first crop in Andhra Pradesh is already ready. However, there are early harvesting because of the uncertainty due to COVID-19. And currently, there are logistic problems there as port operations are closed, and also factories have been working less as well. And therefore, leads us to the question whether they can actually continue supplying to the market, especially not just in the EU, but also to its major markets in the US. And that leads me to transition to Vietnam, which is also a huge player in the European sector. Um, Currently, there are still also container problems there, which leads to longer and more expensive shipping to Europe, and that includes, of course, higher freight rates. But recently, we see also in the price portal that the prices for Vanamai shrimp in Mekong Delta have been dipping and have been dropping, whether this may be caused due to container problems. Also, processors probably want to keep the prices low to keep their margins. Um, but this is something maybe we can discuss later in the panel discussions to my co-panelists, because this is quite curious, because we have heard actually from some EU importers that some importers have been shifting their sourcing from India, which is having a hard time sending in their products to Europe, to shifting to Vietnam, because Vietnam, of course, is already advantageous, is already at an advantage to shifting to Europe, because to supplying to Europe, I mean, because first, they already have the FTA, and second, they are also increasing sustainability and also the corporate social responsibility certifications to Europe, which are very important, especially in northwestern Europe. So they have been shift. There is some demand also coming from Europe to Vietnam. Yeah, so that remains a question. All right. Okay, and now a little bit looking into the future in terms of the outlook in Europe. So COVID-19 cases and vaccinations also have been improving. So as you can see here, that there are three major peaks during the pandemic, but now it has actually being lowered. And that it is quite hopeful, because as the vaccinations also take place, then more of Europe starts to open up. And maybe you will ask, okay, what if we have another peak? So we can see here, if we're basing it on the trends last year. So as you can see here, we're already quite in the week 2018 in Europe, and that you can see here that actually between 18 to 29, that actually the cases are quite low. So we expect that with this combined element of vaccinations, as well as more people getting confident about going to restaurants, and that the demand will pick up in Europe, and hopefully that will then be the case as the vaccination also is pushing through. All right. So now, with this in mind, we now look at the outlook for both Northwestern Europe and Southern Europe. So go first to Northwestern Europe. So in general, also measures are eased and curfew is lifted in most regions. Vaccinations are also ongoing. And for the summer, which is also a peak period for shrimp consumption, the sourcing has already been mostly finished by the European importers. Currently, the inventory is not really a lot at the moment, because European buyers, especially in Northwestern Europe, are still on the conservative side, because they wanted to assess the risk that are related to sourcing. So as I've mentioned earlier, with India having logistics problems, with in Asia having container problems, that's all affecting the confidence of European buyers to actually stock up on their inventory as well. And aside from that, you have to remember that European buyers also suffered financial losses during the pandemic period. So they do not have that big cash availability in their purses to keep purchasing products just to stock in their inventory. And also with the volatility of the prices and the COVID-19 not really, completely out of the picture yet, that's something that is making them uh, have these conservative purchasing decisions. Um, Demand in the retail sector is still active, and that's mainly driven by the convenience products also being sought after during the pandemic as more people stay at home, and also with the lockdown and the restrictions in Europe. But as the food service sector slowly reopens, we can see that slowly also there would be more demand in this. And currently, a lot of the countries are have their terraces open, so the outdoor dining is allowed. But we see now that there are also restrictions being loosened also for indoor dining. So that can also present an interesting case, because as you see, the food service sector is generally still very much limited. Of course, if you don't consider full capacity dining as well. All right. So we now go to Southern Europe. All right. Good news as well from Southern Europe, especially in France, Italy, and Spain, that measures are also being eased. And then vaccinations are ongoing, and just recently also curfew have been moved or completely lifted in some Southern European countries. And so slowly also these countries which have huge processing industry and also huge, very huge tourism industry is slowly opening up. And actually in Spain, which is one of the most visited countries for tourism, actually will also open to vaccinated tourists starting from June 7. So that's coming from any destination as long as you're vaccinated. So very interesting also to have this rush of like expected rush of tourists coming in. What is also interesting to note, based on the importers I've also spoken with, our members, is that the processing sector also starts to prepare for actually Christmas. So not just summer, but also Christmas. Because of course the processing, we have seen this trend also last year, that the Southern European importers are starting a bit earlier to anticipate all those lags or all those delays in the processing. But it's very interesting to note that they are looking into preparation, and that's probably where the one I've mentioned earlier, the automatic tariff quota will take place, because there's still a lot open at this period. So we'll see how that plays into account. Again, restaurants are open in most parts, also like in Northwestern Europe, although they are still restricted. And hotels, as I've mentioned, is going to start welcoming guests also within the safety protocols. With these two European regions outlook, let's now look at the overall outlook of Europe. Okay. So demand will increase as the food service reopens and slowly welcomes more people, and more people get more also confident about dining out. A lot of people have missed this dining experience outside. So it would be interesting to note how this will play out in the future. Uh, However, as I've mentioned earlier, remember that European buyers have a risk avoiding attitude due to the persisting problems in sourcing countries such as India or Vietnam as well. And these are logistic bottlenecks or inavailability of containers, and the delay in shipments. And of course, that also depends on their cash availability and how well they're actually able to bounce back from their losses in the last year. If the question is where are actually they are going to source their raw material. So interesting to note that according to some importers, that intra-EU is actually well active and moving, and that's because as European buyers look for raw materials, not only just in alternative countries such as in Latin America or in some other Asian countries such as Malaysia, they are actually also looking within Europe, because that saves them the the logistics problems, the costs, also the delays in shipments. So containers are moving from one country to another, and that in the short term may also lead to an increase in the local prices within EU, because the EU is of course a trading hub in itself, especially in North Western Europe, the ports of Rotterdam or Hamburg. So that's really interesting. And as I've mentioned earlier, with this in mind, that they're looking for alternative countries to source from, we found that reliability is actually more important now than the pricing for the European buyers, and that's because of the current situation in most sourcing countries, and that they are willing to pay a bit more price. That's why also we see before that the prices are just have just been mildly decreasing, especially in northwestern Europe. And that because they see that reliability is key, especially in the middle of the pandemic and with all these uncertainties. And that leads me to the last question I leave before I end this presentation. Where does or will the consumption take place? Will it be in retail or in restaurants? Will the gain in retail be transferred now to restaurants, perhaps, as the restaurants are now opening up? So that remains also to be seen. Of course, in the short term, there would be much more interest in dining out. So that's Europe in a nutshell. Thank you very much. This is Sophia.
Thank you, Sophia. All right. So very briefly, before we start the panel discussion, if I could just remind everybody, you'll see a chat box in the window that you're watching the webinar on. Anytime you have any questions, just put them in there, and they'll filter through to be asked once we've finished our discussion point. So without further ado, I'd like to start by asking Jeff about the US market so far in 2021. Obviously, food service demand fell to a very low level in 2020. What are you seeing so far this year? How is that balance between retail and food service now?
Well, first of all, the food, the entire shrimp market in 2021 couldn't be more different than what we saw in 2020. It's as divergent as I could ever have imagined. What we had obviously during 2020 was very low demand and a real problem with understanding how to inventory, how to carry inventories, because we just didn't know when things would open here in Europe also. And also we didn't know what kind of impact it was going to be in the production areas. 2021 has completely turned that issue on its head that we had in 2020. Despite the fact that so much business was closed down during 2020, and that we started the year with probably unprecedentedly high inventories that were so high that we were having difficulties getting product from the dock into warehouses. We were having to actually negotiate with warehouses where they would let us bring a container in if we got a container out. Well, again, despite the lower demand, ultimately, by attrition, those inventories began to drop, and there was very little replacement, both because importers were reticent to buy and because some of the producing countries began to have COVID problems. So what we're seeing right now is a really significant shortage of many items, many of the primary items in the US, and it's indicated both in the driving of the pricing and the fact that for the first time in 13 or 14 months, we have warehouses calling us, containers coming, and can we shift some of the business that we shifted away from them back to them? I'm specifically talking about port freezers that we had to run that couldn't handle our business before, and we had to ship products inland. This doesn't look like we're going to see any significant let up over the next few months. Food service has, as expected, exploded. The problem we had was we all kind of expected it. What we didn't know was when it would happen. So our initial thought was that business would get a lot better as restaurants in the northern states were able to start to serve again outdoors. So many of us began to, marginally or very carefully stock in anticipation that business would open up some. What we've seen instead is a pretty massive opening across the board in most states. In fact, virtually all states. And I think a lot of COVID, what are they calling it? COVID fatigue among customers. So food service, we're having the same problem with food service now that we had with retail before. When COVID first hit and product was readily available for both food service and retail business exploded, food service stopped, and most repacking product from food service packs into retail packs. In anticipation or failure to anticipate when this was going to change, and with the demand that we saw, the increased demand that we saw for retail, most of us shifted our buying to retail focused products, and consequently we're all short right now of food service products. Prices have increased dramatically. In some cases, up $1 a pound. And for most customers, there is a more or less a short-term view. What they're seeing now is, oh my gosh, prices have gone up crazy. In fact, prices have only gone up back to where they pretty much normally are. And with the rebound of the prices being up is from a very low baseline that was caused by the fact that there was product available and no demand. Retail, as we talked about when we had this last webinar, retail exploded. And from what we're seeing, what we anticipated before is carrying through. It's backed off a little bit. There is not as much retail demand, or not panic demand. However, it's backed off to a point that's still significantly higher than it was before COVID. And now with food service coming back into play, what we're seeing is what we think will be indicated later in statistics of higher consumption or higher imports and consumption of shrimp. We don't have the kind of panic calls from retailers right now that we had 4 months ago, 5 months ago, but business is still very good. And just as with the food service now, we're beginning to have issues with getting product in to the right places at the right time, because now we're dealing with, curiously, when people use the term perfect storm, it's generally 3 things. So we have those 3 things happening right now. Business is picking up dramatically. The COVID is apparently rearing its ugly head again significantly in producing countries. India, and Jim mentioned to me earlier, Thailand, for example. And the container issues that we're all familiar with are significantly impacting the availability of product. So we've gone from having way too much product and freezers full to having orders that we can't fill, including orders that we did buy the product to fill, but the product hasn't shipped, or it's delayed in shipping because of container problems, or it's placed around places around the world in transshipment, and we don't know when we're going to get it. The bottom line is, I think that we're going to see food service rebound back to normal levels, and retail is not going to lose all the additional business that they picked up during COVID. We have probably a whole class of people, my daughter being one of them at 35 years old, who never cook shrimp or fish at home. It's just not something they did, and they've learned to now. And although they are going to continue to go out and have the experience of eating out in restaurants, seafood has now become I don't want to say a staple, but it's become a option for cooking at home for millions and millions of people that it wasn't before. And this is going to cause us quite a bit of problem for the next few months. Obviously, if we didn't have the container problems or the supply problems due to COVID, and that pipeline could get filled, we wouldn't be seeing this too much and then too little and too much and then too little happening. I see no immediate possibility of alleviating that problem. Business is going to keep growing. Demand is going to keep growing. And from the look of it, the supply problems are either going to stay the way they are or possibly get worse.
Right.
Just bottom line, with one question that was asked is, we're not going to see a big drop off on retail, even though food service is coming back.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Jim, I know Siam Canadian is moving a lot of shrimp kind of from the supplying countries into North America as one of its markets. Does that largely tally with what you've seen and are seeing now? Jim, you there?
Oops. All right, there we go. Got to unmute. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Okay. All right. Things have changed. They've changed permanently. As Jeff was saying, on the retail side, the growth in retail seafood sales will never return to pre-pandemic levels. People have gotten used to buying seafood, particularly shrimp, but other seafood as well, at their local supermarket, either in-store sales or buying it online or through e-commerce sites or whatever. People have become accustomed to cooking seafood at home. It used to be really for the majority of people. Now, there've always been strong retail sales, obviously, but it used to be for the majority of people something that you go out to eat because you don't really know how to cook seafood, you don't know how to cook shrimp or scallops or whatever, and it's kind of special occasion food anyway. So at home we have chicken or pork or steak or whatever, and when we want seafood, we go out to a restaurant. So there's a big sector of the population that has figured out that seafood is actually really simple to make. You can do a lot of things with seafood very quickly. It cooks quickly. To cook shrimp is a matter of minutes versus cooking a meat item that can take 15-20 minutes or longer. So it's fast, it's easy to do, and you can make good tasting food quickly. So there's the increase in retail sales through the course of the pandemic that will drop off. That won't maintain these high levels once everything's completely back to normal, but it'll never go back to pre-pandemic levels. So retail has permanently gained an increased market share, and that includes e-commerce, and any type of retail, pick up whatever you want. It's all there, and that's permanent. The increase we're seeing now, I mean, the U.S. is leading that because I have to give U.S. credit, you really did a good job on the vaccinations, better than anybody, although you screwed up on the pandemic itself, but we won't get into that. But the vaccination rollout in the States has been amazing. A few other countries have done such a good job. So America's opening up first. So things are opening up, restaurants, sports events, concerts, everything. So there's a pent-up energy of people over the past 14 months of not going to restaurants and not going to events, sporting events, casinos, campgrounds, you name it, whatever. And it's happening at the most opportune time. We're just getting into summer and things are opening up. So people with all this lockdown fever are ready to go out. They're ready to go out and spend money. And there's money to spend with the checks that Mr. Biden is sending out and other things that are happening with the economy growing now. There's lots of money to be spent, and it will be spent, and that money will, the more money spent, the more that will create economic benefit and more money to be spent. Yeah. So the opening of food service is going to be quite steep, in my opinion. It's going to be quite dramatic. Now, there's big sectors depending where you are in the United States. Canada will follow a bit later. Canada's a little bit behind on their vaccination, quite a bit behind actually. They haven't done as well. So they're 3 or 4 months, maybe 5 months behind the U.S. in terms of them being able to open up and get back to normal. So a lot of Canada is going to miss the summer boom, which is going to, the U.S. is going to grab more than any other country, in fact. So people are out. They're going to be partying. They're going to be going to restaurants. They're going to be having barbecues with friends. So there's just a ton of consumption that's going to happen over the course of the next 4 months, from now through Labor Day and past. Now, retail is not just going to drop off because of that. People, as Jeff said, people have gotten used to buying seafood in retail. So retail will drop off a little, but consumption in general is going to be really, really large over the next several months. We have all the bumps in the road here. We have supply problems. We've got India, who's suffering a catastrophe in terms of their COVID situation, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel there either. Vaccination rollout is not happening, and it's a mess there, and it's terrifying what's happening there. We have the shipping problem, and the shipping problem is not going to resolve itself overnight. The shipping companies are doing wonderfully. I wish I had invested in Maersk or some of the other lines earlier in the year. I'm sure their stocks are doing well. They're making out. It's not completely their fault, but they're taking advantage of the situation. I think there's no doubt about that. I better be careful. I get some of my containers canceled if I talk too much here. So we have that. We have a lot of impact in the supply chain from producing countries such as India, where you have a problem with workers in factories now, with factories running below capacity, with farmers harvesting earlier because they're afraid of what's going to happen, as Sophia said, harvesting earlier now, and instead of harvesting shrimp, which would have been larger sizes, which are more targeted to food service, whether it be Europe or North America, they're harvesting smaller sizes, which are more retail oriented, and they're going to have an abundance of these. And then I don't know what will happen later in the year when they were supposed to be harvesting the larger sizes. I think those will come up short. Indonesia's been under a lot of pressure this year, good pressure. Retail purchases out of Indonesia have been very, very strong. And they continue. And Indonesia prices, as Sophia says in her weekly blog, Indonesia prices have been firming up. Vietnam, surprisingly, their prices have weakened a little bit, but their exports are very strong nevertheless. So I don't think that's going to be a long-lived situation. The real story. There are two stories here. There's food service and there's retail. Retail had a huge shot in the arm because of COVID. Retail will continue stronger than it did pre-COVID, but it will drop off to a degree. But you've got this massive increase in food service consumption over the next 4 months. And that's going to tell the story in itself in terms of pricing, in terms of availability, in terms of pressure on producing countries, and in terms of shipments. It's not only a problem of cold storages being full because of lack of sales, which may have been the case in the past, but just the massive amount, the volume going into the supply chain, it's bottlenecking. It's bottlenecking in major ports in the United States. It's bottlenecking into cold storages, even though there is movement, but there's just a matter of available truckers and available space and how things go in and out. So regardless of sales or lack of sales, there is congestion in the ports. There's congestion getting in from the ports to cold storages. There is problems with lack of containers. So this is something. Now this is a bump. This is not a permanent situation. The shipping lines put more containers and have more available vessels. They're going to make more money ultimately. So it's not in their interest to keep everybody at their mercy as we are now with absurd increases in freight. I mean, I'm seeing our office in China where we were at $8,000 for a container going to $16,000. I mean, crazy stuff, just nuts. And not having containers available, having producers and exporters not wanting to sell on door delivery basis anymore, as they have for many importers and retailers, wanting to only ship into a container yard because they don't want to deal with the aggravation and the uncertainty of managing trucking from a container yard to a final destination to a door delivery. So things like that will continue. I think that the shipping issue is going to be will take us through to the end of the year. It's not going to get resolved within the next few months. It's going to get worse over the summer as shipments into the U.S. increase and Canada follows. The EU, as they open up, they will have the same thing. Things will be opening up there. In the EU, seafood has traditionally been more of a food service item than a retail item, although retail has always been strong. So as they open up, there's going to be a massive increase in demand there. So I think what we're looking at for the next, I see no possibility of a weakness in the market between now and January 1st. And I would be very surprised if we saw a weakness in the market in the first quarter of 22. Eventually, maybe production gets back to normal. India gets through their COVID issues. Other countries get through their COVID issues. The shipments, the shipping lines, improvement with container availability and vessel availability, etc., then things will taper off and things will even out. I think we have a permanent increase in seafood consumption, period. Okay? Not just it's going from retail will drop and food service will come back up. We have a permanent increase in seafood consumption. Now, to what percent that would be, I don't know. But without question, it's become a more important. Let's say it used to be more of a special food. I mean, not all special, obviously. You have small, shrimp retail, which is not special. It's pretty cheap. It's cheaper than pork or beef or whatever. But for the large part, it isn't. It's more mainstream now. I put it that way. So you've got the premium items, black tiger shrimp and crab and lobster and scallops, going for white tablecloth restaurants or premium retail. And then you have the cheaper mainstream stuff. But it's all become more mainstream now, and that I think is what's going to happen. So I think permanent increase in seafood consumption, a dropping off of retail. Maybe sometime this year you'll see retail consumption dropping to some degree, but I don't think a big drop. And food service will be ratcheting strong through the end of the year.
Right. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Sophia, it was kind of the question that you posed at the end of your presentation, but how do you see the outlook for kind of the different European markets in terms of food service and retail, at least in the near term?
I think as I've mentioned earlier, the European industry for the food sector actually just has reopened, not like the US. In Europe, it just actually reopened. So like in the previous week. So it's expected, of course, that in the short term that this trend may likely be in demand. So the food service sector will start demanding more, and of course, Europe is a hot tourist destination as well. And with all the summer coming soon, and I mean the summer coming soon, and the hot weather becoming more stable also with the weather. So we expect that demand to also be translated in the food service sector. So I think I agree also that people are now more accustomed to cooking more convenience products from the retail, and that will not soon like quickly go away indeed, because as I've mentioned earlier, there are still some people who have enjoyed doing that at home. But on the short term, I think there will indeed be a spike in the food service sector as more people get confident in going to restaurants, and also the tourism industry also reopens.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. Gabriel, I wanted to ask you about the Chinese market primarily, as that's an area that obviously is a lot of suppliers have found difficult to ship to, particularly in 2020. And it's sort of a market that you can offer some good insight into, I think.
Well, the Chinese market for Ecuador has been extremely important over the past 8 or 10 years, driving the growth in Ecuador's production with their demand. So it is a very important market for us. In 2020, when they started to do COVID checks in the cardboards and in the containers, they definitely affected and scared a lot of exporters and importers. The exporters on the one side in Ecuador have to think twice before sending a container that has been fully disinfected and sprayed and gone through a lot of process, which was put in place by them in a joint effort with the local authorities in Ecuador, plus the private companies, the exporters. And they all went through a very thorough process of reaching an agreement on what was the proper protocols. But even then, nothing guarantees that you don't find COVID on a box, because it's not live COVID that they're finding. It's not something you touch and you put in your face and you get COVID from. It's the strains or DNA from COVID. So I mean, if it was there sometime, it might still be there, even though you sprayed it and it's not alive and it's dead and it's not useful, whatever it is. So this caused a contraction on the, I want to say, on people's confidence to export to China. So when the Chinese importers came to us after Chinese New Year purchases in November of 2020, which was, again, they wanted the shrimp and they paid a higher price, and we exported a lot of volume towards them. We had been preparing to shift our volumes elsewhere. We had been preparing all of 2020. After March, we prepared to shift our volumes to P&D products, to retail in Europe, retail in the States, to headless products. We tried everything to steer away from China because of our dependency from them and the fact that they were going up and down in their demand. That fluctuation cost us internal problems and prices. So towards the end of the year, they had a good sourcing from us, a good season purchasing in November from us for their head-on Chinese New Year consumption. And in December, when they came back to us and said, well, listen, we want your shrimp, but we can't pay that new price that you guys have. Why do you have a higher price? Well, we had a higher price because now we had and were supplying different markets. And in January and December, we had a completely new redistribution of our shrimp market, completely new in January. Now, that changes over the past 4 months. From January until April 2021, it has changed because in January, Ecuador only had 100 million pounds of shrimp in the month. So out of that 100 million pounds, Ecuador had 34 or 30 sent to the US, 30 or 34 sent to Europe, and there was another 35 left, of which 10 million went to Thailand, who was buying to reprocess shrimp. So 10 million was sent there, and then that left only 20 million for the Chinese market, right? So all of these other markets that were very interesting decreased the supply availability for the Chinese market. And once the Chinese importers saw that it wasn't a 1 month deal, that it was a trend, that they were being left to the last option, meaning if I have 3 buyers, I will first listen to whatever Europe and USA is saying or asking me for my product. And once they cannot take the product form that I have, or once I am done with that capacity for peeling, then I can go back to China and say, listen, China, okay, I have these containers, but this is the price. This is the price I've been selling at. And it took them a while to get on board to the price increase. They've been scared away from price increasing because they've been burnt in the past heavily. In 2019, they bought a lot of product in November, and in February, the market crashed, and the prices went down, and importers lost $1 a kilo or $1.50 a kilo. So they're very, very conscious about the price increases. So they were very afraid of paying into and buying into this new price increase, while USA and Europe needed the shrimp because their retail had grown, their food service was reopening, is still on the way to reopen, and they were needing shrimp because we have they have problems in India, they have problems. Everybody has problems all over the world with logistics and delivering containers on time, even though exports are up. Imports, in the States are up. It's because the consumption has clearly gone up. So when the Chinese realized that we had out of the other options and we had found these other options to be suitable for us and had adjusted our facilities to produce these products that we weren't producing in the past, they had to pay a higher price to increase. And since January, where they were started very low, until now, they have increased from 20% of our export market to now about 45, 48% of our export market. So again, China is back on the map for Ecuador. Why is it back on the map from 20 to 48? Because Ecuador went from 100 million pounds a month to 167 million pounds a month last month. So when you increase from 100 to 167 million, that's 67 million extra pounds that we can't peel. So we have to pack it and head on and ship to China. So that's basically why we are going back to that dependency, is because the volume produced in that month forced us to get back into China. And now China wants the product because they clearly have been short from receiving product from us for 4 or 5 months. So they want the product right now. They need it. The importers are hungry for product, and they're fighting the prices against the prices from Europe and the United States.
Sure. And to quickly bring in one of the questions we've had from our audience, do you have a sense over the next year or two, will China be looking to Ecuador to fulfill its kind of import demand, or do they look elsewhere as well, depending on other supply pictures?
Well, I think that for Chinese authorities and for Chinese importers, the first thing they're looking for is kind of COVID numbers. it is very important to them. They don't want to import anything COVID. They've made a whole sensationalism, I don't know if that's the proper word, about how we don't want COVID to come in on packaging, either from salmon, from chicken, from beef. We don't want COVID to come in here, right? So if they've already done that part, they can't turn around and say, I'll buy from whoever has it. They have to narrow it down a little more and say, okay, I'm buying from Ecuador, but there are these checks in place. I'll buy from India, but there will be these checks in place. And in the past few weeks, we've seen several notifications of containers found with COVID traces or something. And there's a new plan in place where they suspend people. To the end of the line, they will be searching for seafood everywhere in the world, but they will also be defending their own seafood production during the time that they have it. So this is the moment where they start to produce. Of course, it's not enough what they produce, and they know they need the imports. They will continue to look for it for sure. It's just they have to, if they want to continue to look for it and become a number one on anybody else's mind, they have to loosen up a little on their restrictions. They're frightening people away from selling to China.
Sure. Okay. I wanted to move on to India. Obviously, they're having an awful time with coronavirus. And I wanted to ask each of our panelists, maybe starting with Jeff and Jim again. I think you both touched on how India's problems are affecting the supply picture at the moment. What can we expect in terms of other countries maybe winning market share from India? Is anyone going to be able to compete in that space, or can anyone meet the sheer volumes that India sends to the US? If we start with Jeff.
Yeah, the simple answer to that is no. You know, if we look back at when we had EMS problems and Thailand was producing 600,000 tons a year, and then things went down there, even had the other countries not had EMS and picked up, there's just no replacing that volume. Now, you know, India has become basically the benchmark for, at least for the US market. And although I should back that up. Ecuador has done a great job of filling the needs that we have that we're not being able to get supplied by India. However, even Ecuador is going to have a limit. The shrimp, from what we understand, is there. There's no real issues with having shrimp. The issue is, can they get it processed and can they get it shipped? Two different situations. There is, and I missed a lot of what Jim said because I kept getting kicked off, but I caught part of it. There is no prospect in the near future, in the next few months, of this changing, because even if it changed overnight, there's going to be a 3, 4, 5 month lag time. And by the time things can get better, even if they started right now, we'll be into the holiday cycle of buying. So unfortunately, the answer is no. If India cannot get straightened out, and even if they do, we're going to see a pipeline issue for a long time to come.
Sure.
I think, like Jim said, right through the end of the year.
Yeah. And Jim, do you see that kind of prices just coming under continuous pressure as opposed to different supply becoming available?
Yeah, prices are definitely going to come under pressure. As Jeff says, there's no supply problem in India. Their production is going to be actually quite good this year. You know, their problem will be to get their shrimp to market. Now, as I said earlier, although there's no supply problem in terms of, let's say, overall tonnage, there is going to be some sizing differences coming as a result of this early harvesting, and if that will continue, I don't know. But I will see that we will we will be short of large sizes from India, regardless of whether they can get the product on vessels or not. So yeah, and there's nobody who can pick up the slack in this short period of time. Ecuador is already increased. Gabriel, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you've already ramped up your production significantly. So I think there's not a lot of room left to increase your production out of Ecuador. At some point, the Chinese are going to figure that you can't get sick from a box of shrimp or salmon, because you can't. You know, and even now, I mean, the CDC and the WHO are saying that you know, we've gone overboard in terms of contact, in terms of cleaning surfaces that we touch and everything. Even live COVID is more difficult to contact in that method, in that way, than previously thought. Now, when you get to dead COVID, as Gabriel said, this is traces of COVID. These are not live viruses. So the chances of anybody getting sick from packaging are very, very slim, if they are at all. So at a certain point, the Chinese may say, well, maybe we should start to relax this thing, because it doesn't make sense. Now, they've also, you know, there's in the Chinese market, there's a trail of paranoia which has gone through the whole supply chain. So consumers have become afraid of imported seafood because of COVID. So wholesalers and distributors throughout the country are often repacking imported product and relabeling it as product of China, because people, restaurants, food service customers, and retail customers are afraid of imported products. So this is sort of a matter of, I don't know, not quite paranoia, but a matter of sensationalism to make people overly concerned about it. And now they're going to have to ramp that back. And it'll take a little while, I don't know how long, until Chinese people become comfortable again with imported seafood. So you're going to have a longer term problem there. Nevertheless, Chinese consumption will start to increase, and that'll put more pressure on countries, very specifically Ecuador, but indeed India, Vietnam, Indonesia. So the demand there is going to increase. Vietnam production will be bigger this year than last year, but nowhere near enough to make up for anybody's shortfall. Indonesia production is good, but it's not going to increase enough to make up for anybody's shortfall. Thailand can increase a little bit, maybe, I don't know, but the baseline isn't there anymore from Thailand. So whatever shortfalls are coming out of India, there isn't somebody to pick up the slack.
Sure. And
on that note, everybody talks about these shortfalls in India, and I agree. I mean, there has to be something happening. We hear the news on the factories, we hear the news on the logistics side of it, but then we see the import numbers in the States, and they're up, and they're up from last year to this year. So
yeah, but I think the key there is that this huge ramp up in COVID is very recent in India. We're only talking 45 days, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, like we were back, I don't know, 4 months ago, 5 months ago, India they were patting themselves on the back, saying, "Look, we beat COVID with, you know, just by whatever we did," and then they realized they hadn't. So I think we've not yet seen the impact of the COVID situation in India now, and that's going to be hitting the supply chain or the lack of product going into the supply chain going forward, rather than, you know, I think it's too early to see the impact.
And as the US data is also import is a bit also delayed, like 1-2 months. So
correct.
That's why you cannot see it yet.
There was a month last year, and this is just off the top of my head. There was a month last year where India went down from 70 million to 20 million in exports to the USA. And I don't know if it was June or July. It was right on the summer where they were down drastically because they were going through their first wave of COVID. So with that, what I mean is, even though they may slow down, they may still be above last year's numbers, because that that was a deep dive last year from 70 million to 25 million, I think it was. And I'm just recalling numbers from my head. So even if they ship 30 million this year, they'll still be up 2-3% from last
Yeah.
year, but it'll be vastly short for what the market needs and depends from them.
But there's another factor in some of that increase, and that is during the time period you're talking about, demand here was low, freezers were full, and my Indian suppliers were jammed with inventory in their freezers. And unhappy with the pricing levels that had fallen. Farmers were actually giving them a very difficult time. So, not a lot maybe, but some of the increase that you've seen was just backlogged inventory that finally shipped.
Okay.
And then the other issue that we have, and we're hitting right now, is for so many months there was no food service business, and the food service companies basically depleted their inventories over that time. And as things opened up, the latent demand is huge. So we had to go really, I don't want to say crazy, but we increased our imports or our purchases by a lot, and only part of those purchases actually turned into imports, and the rest of them is still sitting backlogged.
Right. And finally on this kind of the potential shortfall in the market from India, I wanted to ask you, Sophia, do you see any other suppliers able to kind of meet some of the shortfall in the EU? Are there certain logistical requirements they have to meet, or maybe certifications that they have to meet? And involved in that, do you see Vietnam's free trade agreement helping them there?
Yeah, again, we have to look at it in two different markets. So that's the Northwestern Europe and the Southern Europe. And for Southern Europe, of course, they are demanding the so big red shrimp. And therefore, we see that could be possibly provided with Latin American countries, Ecuador, Venezuela as well. So those can be alternative sources for Southern Europe, demanding that kind of product. And for Northwestern Europe, there's of course the Vietnam. We are already seeing, as I've mentioned in my report, that we are seeing some European importers actually now inquiring from Vietnam instead of India, just to see like the other options as well. And as you've mentioned, no, Vietnam has this free trade agreement also with Europe, and it has already built a strong relationship with Europe, so that makes it a bit more easy for them to supply to Europe as well. And the factor in this as well is the certifications, so sustainability certification, and of course Vietnam is also working on their CSR certifications. So these are all factors that could play in whether a European importer will actually shift to buying to another source. So yeah, I think those are the scenarios for different regions in Europe.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Neil, may I make a point, because we're talking about just now about Vietnam, and this is kind of a thing that we don't talk about a lot. However, we really don't know how much of the Vietnam production is actually Indian raw material. So, if we have this backlog of Indian raw material, two things could happen. A positive is India will not be able to value add because they have so much issues with COVID and they don't have the labor. So they'll produce a lot more headless shrimp. That could go to a place for reprocessing. On the other hand, I don't know that we have any reason to believe that they can ship to Vietnam any easier than they can ship anywhere else in terms of the container issues. So.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Okay. I know we're actually moving towards the end of the time that we'd suggested. So I wanted to ask quickly about the Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix. not so much your thoughts on it. I don't know if everyone's seen it or not, but I wanted to know whether it had filtered through into the supply chains that you work with. Have you seen sort of additional requests for, evidence that there's nothing upsetting happening in supply chains? If Jeff, I can come back to you again quickly on that.
For us, it's become yesterday's news. We had a little flurry for a week or days with people asking questions, most of them being our customers who were only concerned about how they should answer if they got a lot of flack. And there was some flack out there, but mostly from people who were already in that camp of anti-aquaculture or anti-fishing. And that's kind of, from our perspective, it's waned. I haven't heard the word seaspiracy until you wrote it to me, probably in 2 or 3 weeks.
Sure. Jim, have you seen anything different from that?
No, there was really very little blowback from the conspiracy. I think part of the problem was it wasn't a well-produced show. It was very entertaining, like an anime that my son might watch. But I mean, they take facts and then they add things on top of the facts, and they have a baseline of truths, and then they extrapolate from there and make their story. So there was so much press on Seaspiracy, so much press which revealed that a lot of the things they were saying were not accurate, were simply not true, were made up. Even a lot of it's true. There's a lot of good points that are being made in that thing, and it's unfortunate that they sensationalize it and twist it to the point where they lose credibility. So I think one of the main reasons, or an important factor in the fact that there isn't been a lot of blowback, a lot of retailers becoming concerned, a lot of other people becoming concerned, is because it's lacking credibility, and that's widely known in the media itself. So even the New York Times, when the New York Times comes against something, you're not off to a good start.
Sophia, do you know if it had much impact in Europe?
I think because according to like our members down in the supply chain, because that's what you're asking, no, importers, exporters, there's not much inquiries about it. Also because I personally asked them as well. So there's not much inquiries about that per se, but of course I think in general with the seafood industry there is heightened awareness towards the need of sustainability and also transparency. I think because I work with market intelligence, so that's where for me the biggest takeaway, that there is a heightened awareness.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, has 2020 kind of seen much impact on blockchain kind of being used in the shrimp coming through to Europe? Do you know?
I think definitely there is some interest in that, but that's mostly for niche markets, I think, especially in Europe. But indeed, like with the transparency also being much in demand, also sustainability. We've also seen some of our members really becoming interested in this as well. But it's mostly also for niche markets.
Okay. And Gabriel, have you seen any kind of inquiries around the Seaspiracy thing make their way to Ecuador?
No, not really. In Ecuador, we were pretty much left alone with Seaspiracy. It wasn't focused on Ecuador at all. And yes, there's always been bad press through all aquaculture and trying to downplay aquaculture's efforts for sustainability. But I think that over the last years, I think that our efforts in sustainability and traceability have passed beyond and have proven that everybody's interested in a sustainable future. So I don't think I didn't even hear it here. It was a big news 1 week because there was 3 articles that kind of were passed around, but I had no customer say, "Hey, are you guys into this? Have you heard this? Is there something going on?" Nothing other than a few letters of people actually fighting back against it, saying, "Hey, this was an unfair projection of what the business is."
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I think we better move on wrapping up then. Maybe if I could ask each person as quickly as they can to kind of give a summary outlook, maybe looking at the sort of holidays, Christmas this year. Essentially, are we going to see some ordering normality? I mean, a few of you touched on it saying no, but just to round off, what do you see by way of the ordering situation for the end of 2021, start of 2022? Jack?
I think actually we're going to see some ordering normalities in that ordering is going to be quite a bit bigger than what we would have expected. The problem is going to be a supply situation, not an ordering situation. I don't see how the supply chain and the pipeline gets filled. We're going to have retailers who are trying to figure out now how much of that increased business they'll keep, begin to look at their normal time to order it, which is next month for holiday business. And I don't see any difference in the ability of the producers to produce value-added goods, cooked shrimp, P&D shrimp for retail. So we're going to have a big problem.
Jim, on that note, is there any forecast, and this is a question for the container companies rather than you, I guess, but is there any forecast on normality in terms of container logistics?
No, I mean, nobody has any idea. And as I said, the shipping lines, may not necessarily be in a hurry to resolve these problems because they're doing exceptionally well out of it. In terms of supply, year to date for my company, we've had our strongest retail sales ever, and they continue. So retailers have been placing more orders and earlier, but they still, as Jeff said, they haven't placed the big ones. The big holiday orders are yet to come for many retailers. So when they go to place those orders, they're going to be finding that production may not be available and shipments may not be available for their holiday needs. So I think a lot of retailers, major food service distributors and others are going to come up short over the holidays. So there's going to be a shortage and very strong demand.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Sophia, what's your sort of quick summary in terms of how Christmas 2021 looks?
I think Christmas is still a bit. There's still many factors that are I think in play that could contribute to the European demand. But in general, I think what I've said earlier that in the short term that there would be indeed increase in the demand from the food service sector, and the retail sector is also very much still active. But as I've mentioned, at the moment, European buyers are still very much into this risk assessment behavior. And see whether these problems with the sourcing countries are going to be resolved, and also within the countries within Europe as well, how things will play out as well as more restaurants reopen, if the demand will be going to be there actually. Although in summer the expected demand will be there, and that it will be higher, and importers have now almost finished sourcing for the summer demand. So probably like after the summer, then once it has been consumed, that inventory, then there will be pickup for another demand, especially for the northwestern Europe. And for southern Europe, as I've mentioned earlier in my presentation, that like some processors are already looking into the preparations for Christmas. So it's there. It's there. The demand will be there, and with the ATQ still open for much of the shrimp in, especially for Southern Europe processing sector, then that will also be yeah, quite interesting to see how it. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. And finally, yeah, Gabriel, how do Ecuador's markets look kind of for the turn of the year 21-22?
But I think that, I mean, it follows what everybody is saying. Ecuador is having a very strong demand from Europe, from USA, from China at the moment, and I think that's going to continue until the pipelines get full, and that doesn't seem to be anywhere near. And if we take a kind of summary of what we've been hearing, I think importers are afraid of what could still happen in the next few weeks, in from India's shipments being late, from the logistics from all over the world, not only India but from all over the world being late. So that will keep everybody on their toes and looking for product. And we are right in the middle of the world, so it's kind of the first place people call. It was the last place people called in the past because they knew that we were only doing head-on, and we only had headless and value added for the leftovers. But that changed over 2020. Ecuador kind of proved a little bit that, hey, we want to do this, we want to give it a try, and we gave it a good hit. I mean, we've increased our value added production by over 50%. We went from 200 million to 300 million pounds towards the end of this year in peeled production, and that's only the beginning. I mean, people are doing heavy investments here to widen and be able to peel more product and reach those markets that we preferred not to reach because of the way we grew. We grew into China with China's demand, and their product was head on. So we grew that portion of the factory, and we didn't grow the other portion of the factory. With today's recent events and last year's events, it pushed us towards something that we've been talking about for 8 years, that we needed to change the product form in Ecuador. We needed to be more versatile for when that moment came that China didn't want to buy from us. It's not that China doesn't want to buy from us right now. They want to, but now that we can peel and do the other products that COVID pushed us to do, right? Because during certain months, COVID had affected China to the point where their importing was almost shut down. They were decreasing their imports. They had inventories. They just weren't consuming it. So all of that changed our product form. That's what's giving us a better future in this market. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be feeling this ramp up or need for production from the States or from Europe, because we wouldn't have that product. We being the same shrimp, it's still, we can sell head on. We could sell head on in the past. If we were offering head on today, people wouldn't be taking it. That's not what people want and need right now. So the fact that we changed in the process of changing is what's making it interesting for Ecuador.
Sure.
And on a positive note, Ecuador, the export numbers from Ecuador you mentioned were up about 10%, 9.8%, the export numbers in one of the initial presentations. And that's true for the export data. But for actual production data, we are a little over 18% above what we were, production versus production data from last year. And that's simply because we're peeling more. That's where it is. It sounds like we're exporting 10% more. Yes, it's 10% more exports. But since they are peeled, it's actually 18%, 19% more production. So Ecuador is doing a great job at increasing their production. I mean, it's amazing how the farmers were able to adjust to these new prices of last year, which were terrible, and they had to adjust. So we became better at producing with the costs and more effective.
Yeah.
All right.
Can I just add one question, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure.
Neil? Yeah. No, I was just wondering because in Ecuador, then you said that indeed, like you are catering to the U.S. and Europe, but then the peeling is much more expensive there, and you have indeed said that you have changed your processing and your system just to cater to these new markets. My question is whether this kind of this catering to the U.S. and Europe will be in the long term sustainable. If, for example, the Chinese demand picks up, is this something that you think that it's actually going to be in the long run uh, quite interesting for Ecuador, or will you go back to China just to supplying there, or how do you think that will play out?
Okay, I'm going to take it as a two-part question, and here's my take on this.
Mm,
The first part was the labor cost, and the
yeah,
second part is we will go back to China
yeah.
if of course the price doesn't work for us based on that labor cost.
Mm,
So the first part is the labor cost. The actual labor cost in a pound of peeled product that reaches the market out of the final $6, $5 per pound price is in Ecuador, the actual hand labor is about, I'd say, 25 to 30 cents.
mhm,
And maybe it's half or a little less than half in Asia, in some parts in Asia, not in all of them.
yeah,
So if we have 25 and they have half, that's let's say 12.5 to say there's a 12-cent difference per pound in the final product. That's the margin we're talking about. So that's not something that breaks a deal, especially when markets are short. When markets are short, there's nothing that breaks the deal. You mentioned it in your presentation. People want reliability before lack of supply.
yeah,
So in that scenario, you forget about even the 12 cents. But in a normal scenario, are we willing to sacrifice the 12 cents? I think that yes. I think that in the current situation, with all the current restrictions that there are in China, we will sacrifice those 12 cents any day, because it's much more difficult to send a container 45 days over the ocean, go reach China, and then China saying, "Oh no, we found
yeah.
traces of COVID or somebody coughed on this."
They will send it back.
Or they look around, hey, I don't know, I don't like this.
Yeah.
Well,
May I chime in for a moment too?
I'm sorry.
May I say something?
Yep.
I think we're going to see 2021 as a watershed year for what we're talking about. We've been talking with Ecuador for 15 years about getting mechanized, getting into the marketplace that Vietnam and then India kind of took, Thailand originally.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing right now, and we're very involved in this, is I'm shopping for a lot of equipment right now. We've gone from the skepticism and more or less everybody in Ecuador that I dealt with saying, yeah, we need to do this. We need to address that market. We're going to do it soon. This year, with what happened in China, has opened the eyes and said, you know, Ecuador is looking at it now and saying, there's no reason we can't have a big piece of this steady market, not the market that goes up and down, but the program business market, the supermarket business.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to see that 12 cents, first of all, is negligible, and I think it's going to go away. And the second part of that is once the investment is made, and we're not just talking about shifting from hand peeling to going back to head on. Once the investment is made, the equipment's in place, people are going to run those plants. They're going to run that equipment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that would put us in a position where we haven't been ever as a supplier for a program business. And then that brings to a point of sometimes, and it was mentioned here, that there was a point in the year where Ecuador's prices were so low that that everybody wanted to buy from Ecuador, and we increased our participation in Europe because our prices were so low. They were so low because we're not doing the program business. They were so low because in the program we're selling the next 2 weeks of product. We're not selling July.
Right.
India's trying to sell August. That's the program business. That's the mentality we need to get into as Ecuadorians. We need to supply a constant program of X amount of pounds out of our total production need to be on a fixed program. That way, the amount of product on the daily, I want to say stock market price, or on the daily, what's the word is,
Spot market.
the spot market. That's what I wanted to say. The spot market price, that needs to be decreased. If there's less spot product available, there's less fluctuation, and everybody needs less fluctuation because we need this to be as stable as it can be. Of course, always supply and demand will bring it up and down, but spot market brings it spiking up and then it drops it immediately. And then when everybody loses money, everybody's upside down with their inventory. They bought what they didn't need, right? But if we get a large percentage of our production out of the spot market, this will be a nicer playing field for everyone.
And it hasn't been lost on the Ecuadorians that over the last year, people like me have bought hundreds of containers of very inexpensive Ecuador shrimp and sent them to China and Vietnam to be peeled. This is not lost on them. They're seeing it now.
Absolutely. And it still continues to happen. It happens now. It's happening right now with even these prices, which are much higher than before. It's still happening that shrimp is being sent to be peeled to shrimp plants in China. Out of that percentage of shrimp that goes to China, in the past, it was 97, 98% head on. And now it's borderline 85. It's 85, 80, 87. There's a lot of that shrimp that is headless shrimp that's going to be reprocessed either for local consumption or their exports, whatever it is they're using it for, I'm not sure, but it goes to their plants because the plants are the ones demanding it. So it's definitely a change and something that we are noticing and that we need to change. So rather than sending our product over there, and that does away with that 12 cents we were speaking of before.
Yeah. All right.
Just
Thanks, Gabriel.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to interrupt, really, because this has all been really interesting. But yeah, I better let you all go back to your daily business. But no, thank you to all of our panelists for giving their time. It's been really interesting. And thanks again to our sponsors, Sunnyvale, who, again, having a sponsor allows us to make it free for everybody to watch. So thank you, everybody. Visit Undercurrent News to keep up with the shrimp news. And join us again at our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Neil, may I make one last comment, because you had brought it up in some of what you sent me, is just on the marketplace, we may see a phenomenon that we saw several years ago when India ramped up so aggressively and didn't have the capacity to value add. We may find a divergent market over the next few months where headless shrimp is falling and value-added shrimp continues to climb. And that's something that is probably one of the most important factors that we need to be watching.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
All right.
That's something that Ecuador can produce a bunch of, and value-added we're very limited on. So the same. For different reasons, but the same.
Okay. Well, we'll check back in on that next time we come online then.
Next webinar.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Okay. Thank you all.
All right.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.